Comedy is subjective is a saying that, at its core, means that not everyone finds the same thing funny. It's hard to say why a joke or meme leaves some people cackling while others stone-faced, but when it comes to writing humor, you want to have more hits than misses. That especially applies for comedy shows or jokey characters because with a dull punchline, they can easily become disliked or hated very quickly. Enter BFB Post Split, an already divisive season that reintroduces our comedic character of discussion, Purpleface. He's often lumped in as one of the big problems this season has, being seen as an annoying nuisance who overstays his welcome and distracts from the important stuff happening this season. It's a consensus that has softened with time, but as someone who does like Purpleface, I want to look at why he's gotten stuck with such a bad rap for so long. I'll be taking a look at not really his journey since he wasn't a contestant, but really all Purpleface does in BFB, and the series as a whole, to paint a full understanding of the ups and downs of his character. So without further ado, let's take a look at BFDI's most controversial joke character. Starting with something else controversial, let's briefly talk about early post-split. Regardless of how you feel about the split itself, it's pretty clear that the sting it brought was only worsened by how the early episodes of post-split feel especially weak. It just doesn't feel like the season knew what it wanted to be, and I'd say it wasn't until BFB 21 or 22 where the season began trying to find a direction. Episode 21 happens to be where Purpleface is foreshadowed, being trapped in a box that both teams come across while raiding Yellowface's warehouse. He's given an intimidating aura, as a creature of malice and mystery. It feels very disconnected to what he ends up becoming, but nevertheless, he is clearly being set up for some sort of prominence within the season. But what could he do, and what has he already done? Well, based on the IRL release order, which doesn't count BFDI A9, this is the first time we've seen Purpleface since BFDI 24, where he's set up as a pompous rival to Yellowface in a filler bit, and that's it. This made Purpleface like a blank violet canvas that the writers could take in almost any direction. I mean, this was way before 1, so the only other instance of a non-competing character having big influence in the plot was Eva Leafy, so using Purpleface in the same way, to push a new conflict, new overarching story, new anything, could inject some O-negative in a season that really needed new blood. Notice the word could, because again, while I do like Purpleface, his actual role in post-split is a flawed one. So with that, let's get into what he actually does. Purpleface is freed from his metallic prison in BFB 23 when the Have-Cots get booted into it by Flower. Upon his release, he chases them down and eats them like Kirby after they shield themselves. Now right away, even while he's being portrayed as a genuine threat, it's clear that bro is not very intimidating. His design and English accent are the culprits behind that, but even so, his presence does add some flair to the challenge. It makes the Have-Cots' journey back to the warehouse for bolt cutters more interesting. And love him or hate him, it is cool to see such a niche character return after almost a decade. That's not all though, because after chowing down on the Have-Cots, he returns in a post-credit scene where he chats with Flower about how she was acting meaner this episode. Now I think this scene is good on its own, but with the context of him just being freed, making Purpleface a therapist doesn't make much sense, and gives the audience some mixed signals when he was shown as a real danger in BFB 21 and this episode. It makes his inclusion in this scene feel kind of forced, which is a reoccurring issue for him, but I guess in this case the writers want to further establish him as a new regular, because from here on out, Purpleface is in every episode. He pops up in BFB 24 almost right away, where he starts trying to have more of a stake in the game by secretly hosting the next elimination. This is yet another Purpleface scene I do like, and the reason behind it is, for the most part, I think Purpleface is funny. His snooty rich accent, combined with how easily he can flip from being malicious to the butt of the joke, feels fun and fresh compared to the typical dynamics that 4NX have had with the cast all season. Now there is a point where it stops feeling fresh, but we'll get there when we get there. Staying in this episode though, while the elimination itself wouldn't change if it was hosted by 4NX instead of Purpleface, I think it's a neat change of pace that leads into his continued role in the episode, where just by hanging around for the party making challenge, Woody decides to throw a party for him as a prank, and Lollipop uses him to try and unsuccessfully throw away the W. Because of that, I think Purpleface doesn't feel forced here, and works pretty well. BFB 25, however, starts to highlight his clear flaws. The challenge is to find a totem in a temple, and unlike last episode where Purpleface added to said challenge, here he just instant transmissions in as a temple tour guide, and only contributes his regular humor that can not only feel like more of a time waster in a shorter episode, but I can also see it being a bit annoying if you don't find his typical humor funny. He's no longer a new addition, nor adding a fresh layer to the episode, which makes his inclusion feel less natural. He's just around for the hell of it, and it stands as a not bad, but not needed outing for Purpleface. He isn't around much in BFB 26 though, but that's only because Profiley is the star of the show, so there isn't much room for him until the post-credit scene where he hitches a ride on the bus everyone takes out of the Pillory Ruins to, ironically enough, get away from all the side characters. But being a side character isn't necessarily the problem, as what ends up being his undoing is continuing to seem unnecessary, because even after just being sidelined last episode, BFB 27 is another instance where his inclusion isn't justified. He's able to roll high on charisma, which convinces X to make him a co-host, but it's a pointless platitude of a position that 4 doesn't respect enough to even teleport Purpleface out of the challenge, where he is actively a detriment to helping Gelatin and Leafy escape the oven. Like, the bit is just rage baiting, and while you could say Leafy cooking him to a crisp is poetic justice, it doesn't change the fact that I don't think Purpleface is very funny or needed in this episode. That brings us to BFB 28, which starts with X trying to recover him, since 4 won't, but X isn't able to get it right until braving the intense air of the announcer trying to take his show back. Speaking of the announcer, I think what he says here when speaking to X is very interesting.
You quit hosting for a round. 40 contestants quit the game. There's a purple nuisance that you can't get rid of. People keep interfering with the show. You even let one of them join the game. You've lost all control.
Now, I could be reading into it too much, but this line really feels like the narrative trying to justify Purpleface and all the random side characters, while also revealing a solution to improving Purpleface's role this season. For the sake of pacing, I won't get into the nitty-gritty just yet, but just remember this moment for later. Getting back on track, the announcer screen KOs Purpleface right after he gets recovered, and he only appears briefly again during the challenge. I don't have much to say here, honestly, as this episode kind of feels like BFB 26, where he's just fine because of his low screen time, but that doesn't last very long, because BFB 29 is one of his biggest episodes. With 4 in the ground, X on the ground, and the announcer digging in the ground after the budget runs out, Purpleface takes over as basically the primary host, and comes up with the idea of raising money on the air to try and save BFB. Now, I think Purpleface fully taking control is a fun idea in theory, but in practice, I don't really like how it's done, thanks to one scene in particular. He starts by interviewing the final 2, where he questions Gelatin about his game, while only asking Flower about himself. Now, not only does the bit not land, but Purpleface and Flower literally had a heart-to-heart in BFB 23, so it makes no sense why he's brushing her aside instead of Gelatin. After Flower rightfully calls him out, he goes full Fear Factor on her ass before his live show just devolves into chaos as they slowly run out of money. Everyone gets bailed out thanks to Flower though, and Purpleface's role in the episode ends with no one caring that he tried to save the show. Alright, so Purpleface has had some weak episodes before now, but I think this one may be his weakest purely because of that interview scene. I know his personality is supposed to be kinda nonsense, but IMO, the targeted hatred towards Flower just feels super out of character for him, which to me seals the deal on this being his worst outing, even if he is plot relevant. I do think there is a way to improve Purpleface this episode, but to explain that, we gotta first talk about what he does in the finale. He starts out on edge, getting mad at Profiley for no good reason, and when the opportunity arises he yoinks the BFDI and tries to flee the scene. He gets cornered instantly though, with everyone wanting to know why he even tried stealing it, which causes him to fold D and reveal that it's cause no one respected him. He doesn't feel valued enough for his contributions, for his idea to save the show. And this is where the answer to how he could be improved in BFB 29 comes in. Instead of coming up with the idea to save the show and failing at hosting it, I think having him be shafted after he gives his idea in favor of everyone trying to host it LOLer style would both avoid his out-of-character bits and make his anger a bit more understandable, since as is, he is supposed to be unjustified, but after how poor of a job he did hosting The Late Show, it makes it way harder to sympathize with his want for respect. And bouncing back to that want, Purpleface stays stubborn in not wanting to give the BFDI back, and is one of the last three fighting for it until Flower persuades him to stop. She brings up BFB 23, the elimination he hosted, and even the temple tour as good contributions, along with how everyone got used to seeing him after a while. Now her reasoning is a tad weak, but it does at least convince him that wanting to take her prize is unfair, causing Purpleface to bow out of the fight. That's basically where his BFB story ends, as the last we see of him is finally being thanked by 4, and helping out with the ideas for a future season. So that's a wrap on Purpleface in BFB, and I will say that in BFB 30, that I like the conflict he brings to the finale, even if his scheme could have been set up better. Now that we've gone all the way through the season though, let's go back to that solution unearthed by BFB 28. To refresh what I said however many minutes ago, the announcer grills 4 and X about how poorly they've hosted, citing Purpleface and all the random side characters as one of their big failings. He's saying their inclusion makes the game worse, which tells me that the side characters in Post Split are all supposed to feel kind of intrusive. It's a concept that BFDI has used too with all the side characters that season has, but the difference between them is that BFDI is way better at balancing their screen time and making their appearances make sense, even if they are intrusive. In Purpleface's case, however, he appears in every episode after he's reintroduced, and takes up a lot of screen time in all but 2 of them, which feels like way too much. That brings me to the solution, or at least an improvement, and it's pretty simple. Just use him less. In BFB 25, his role as Temple Tour Guide could be replaced by 4, X, or just a random one-off character. In BFB 27, he could remain in the background for longer, only showing up at the beginning or end of the episode, and in BFB 29, the tweaks I already said during that section could be used to still give him motivation to steal the BFDI without coming off as a total jackass. Now these changes don't address things like his personality or confused character direction, but I think reducing his overexposure would at least be a step in the right direction. He definitely works better in moderation, and for evidence of that, we only need to take a quick look at Teapot and his current reception. After BFB ended, Purpleface was gone for quite a while. He didn't appear with Profiling in Teapot 2 or Foreign-X in Teapot 6, but he finally made his return at the end of Teapot 11. He waltzes onto the scene to try to rescue the Exiters from Inside 4, but didn't get the memo that they literally just escaped, leaving him trapped and alone, minus the mystery number hiding in a cage. We then don't see Purpleface again till Teapot 17, where he's in the trenches but gets a shard of hope when he hears a knock knock knockin' on a hallway door. He then makes his most recent appearance in Teapot 19, where he squads up with the kidnapped crew, trying to escape, and their fate is still unknown at this point. Through only having a few scenes across 3 episodes, Purpleface is involved in the main story of the season without feeling overused at all. If anything, he feels a little underused, and it's a big contributing factor to why his reception has changed from mostly hatred to a lot more indifference. More people started to feel bad for him, being trapped in another confined space for so long, and his lower screen time, in a weird way, helps him not be seen as annoying to viewers who don't think his comedy lands simply because there's way less of him doing comedy. As I said at the beginning though, comedy is subjective, so now that we've gone through everything he's done, it's time to get into my overall thoughts. Even with his low points, I think I've made it clear that I do like Purpleface, but I totally understand why so many people didn't or still don't. His comedy already isn't for everyone, but that combined with a BFB storyline that makes him feel both overused and inconsistent makes it very easy for the viewer to be irritated by him and to see him, just like the announcer says, as a purple nuisance. But despite all that, all the issues with his role in the story, the simple facts that I like his comedy, his bravado, and that his messiness matches the energy of Post Split keeps Purpleface as a fun, but flawed character in my eyes. Those flaws are, again, with his role in the story, but from a writing perspective, I do appreciate the attempt at how he's both a separate secondary antagonist that also sets up the main conflict of 4's downfall, even with the rocky execution. It's a role that can be missed as Teapot continues to sail towards a more serious direction, as the crapshoot nature of all the things Purpleface could do in any given episode isn't something that can be replicated by anyone else. It always leaves you guessing, and regardless of what he does next, the continued interest the writers have in including Purpleface in the story leaves me hopeful that his fan opinion can maybe get further out of the tar pit of controversy it's been stuck in for so very long. That's all I gotta say. If you haven't, please subscribe, like, hype, share, hit that bell, comment if you have any thoughts, and thank you for watching.